And good morning, everyone, on another webinar about the SAP Business Data Cloud. So this morning, we're going to take a look at what SAP Business Data Cloud actually means for you as an existing customer with either SAP Analytics Cloud or SAP Datasphere or potentially both. So what does it actually mean from a kind of like administrative perspective, but also what does it mean from a kind of like how can you add value by moving to Business Data Cloud? And we will also talk about the announcement that SAP made about kind of like the price list items basically being removed for a Datasphere and Analytics Cloud. So very quickly to myself as well as to simplify solution. So my name is Ingo Hugeford. I will basically go with you through the webinar this morning. I've been in the SAP area for several years now, and I'm a senior director focused on business data cloud with Simplify Solutions. Simplify Solution is basically a company that has been in the SAP area for like over 10 years now, focused on the analytics part. Now, this could mean SAP Analytics Cloud from a BI perspective. This could mean planning. This could mean topics such as, for example, Datasphere, group reporting, PPC, BW, and now also Business Data Cloud. Why would you want to actually, consider Simplify Solution as a partner, and where perhaps are we different than SAP partners that you have worked with in the past? So, first of all, if you actually look at kind of like the team at Simplify Solution, you will notice that our consultants as well as our leadership team has been in the basically industry and has been around SAP for a long time. So me, for example, being part of Simplify Solution with 10 plus years experience in the SAP area, my number of years of experience is more on the lower end. There's people in the company that have been around SAP for like 15 and 20 years. So you can see basically the depth of experience that Simplify Solution can bring to the table. The other two elements that I want to mention before we come to some of our customers is number one is basically that we're trying to shoot for basically each of our projects and each of our customers to make them an actual reference. And that's not just something we put on a slide, it is actually something we take very, very serious. We're not going to implement some technology just for the technology sake of it. There needs to be value for you as a customer, and there needs to be a good reason on why we're going in a certain direction or why we implement a certain product. Excuse me. And the other part I want to mention is that we're not just a customer that act a partner that brings kind of like consultants to the table. We also basically bring accelerators and pre-built content to a year project. So if you go to our website, you can actually find a lot of pre-configured packages around the topic of analytics that we can leverage to really accelerate actually your project. And instead of like several months, we're talking about a few weeks implementing basically these kind of solutions. Here's just a kind of like extract of some of our customers, and you can see it goes, across different kind of industries. It goes across different kind of topics. You can see, the topic of analytics showing up sometimes. There is financial reporting. There is financial planning. There is HR planning. So this shows that basically it goes across the industry, different kind of size of customers, global deployments, like we have customers in Canada, in the US, in Europe. So this is kind of like just a small extract of like who we are and who our customers are. So let's start actually by looking at some of the problems like a lot of our customers face today, as well as kind of like how Business Data Cloud can help in general. And then we're going to take a look what actually Business Data Cloud means for you as an existing SAC or Datasphere customer. So a lot of you basically as a customer facing the problem of having multiple data sources, having the need to basically combine these different data sources in kind of like your single version of the truth. On the right hand side, you have all your LOBs, not only in terms of different data sources, but also in terms of different kind of requirements, different kind of demands. Basically, people need, for example, for supply chain, they need to know when things are being delivered. Have they been on time? Have they been on kind of like, the amount we ordered, the quality we ordered? You have your finance data, you have sales and HR data. But not only do you have basically the requirement to kind of like create analytics and reporting for all these different kind of LOBs, you also, I'm sure, have gotten the demand to actually go across these kind of LOBs. As an example, you see the finance data. So you have an employee, you have costs for an employee, like, salary, bonuses, healthcare. You have sales. Now, in this term, the sales person is also an employee who is being paid commission. You have HR with like wages and salaries. So that brings another level of complexity into the topic of analytics where you want to go across the different LOBs and you want to be able to combine the different data sources. But at the end, ideally, you have one definition of what your employee, so to speak, is. And basically, you're creating a model actually that creates that scenario where you're bringing in the data from multiple sources, but you're sharing basically the definitions. And this is one of the very complicated scenarios, and I'm sure SAP isn't the only one. Other kind of like ERP landscapes are very similar here, is most of the time that is being spent in projects is basically really around getting the information from the ERP system, from your S4 system, and first of all, making sure it is the right information, but also being able to actually understand that information and making sure it is modeled in the right way. This is where basically today, most of the time in a very typical SAP project is actually being spent. Like it's not about kind of like creating a dashboard or, creating a calculation. The part in the front, making sure that you have the proper data, you have quality data, you have the right definition of the data. That is basically where most of the customers spend most of their time today. So this is just kind of like a different visual showing you basically that a lot of the time and effort in a typical SAP project is spent in the beginning, where actually you should be spending time on the far end, being able to get insights out of your data. Instead of just kind of like connecting to the data, you want to talk about, predicting actually scenarios or kind of like not only, what could happen, but also understanding the reasoning behind it, understanding actually why did it happen in this way? Did we perhaps like, how do we have seasonality in our sales? Basically understanding that root cause. So this is basically what it should be, right? Connecting the data should be actually the least kind of like effort that you have to do. And that's also where Business Data Cloud now comes in to help. You should basically spending most of the time actually analyzing the information and getting to the next step and actually getting to the next level of insights from your actual data so that you can make that decision that you can basically also move to the next level and basically, help your customers growing as well. So this is now where Business Data Cloud comes in. But before we go into the details, a lot of people were, when basically Business Data Cloud was announced, thinking that Business Data Cloud is a completely new product. And, there were lots of kind of like, views and rumors that Business Data Cloud is going to replace BW, Business Data Cloud is going to replace Datasphere, right? But it is actually none of that. Business Data Cloud is basically the next step in SAP's overall data and analytics strategy. And you can see on the screen right now that it isn't going to replace Datasphere or like, Business Warehouse or Analytics Cloud. It actually brings these things together under one umbrella. So it basically combines all those products such as Datasphere, SAC, BW, and it is actually adding on top of that SAP Databricks. And that's an important part to understand. Business Data Cloud is not kind of like replacing your BW system. It's not replacing your Datasphere system. It brings these elements together, which then gives you several benefits, which we will go through what that actually means. The other part you can see here is that as part of SAP's AI strategy, Business Data Cloud is clearly being positioned as the foundation for any kind of basically data access, for any kind of like, so to speak, foundational data for your AI workflows. For example, such as like SAP Joule, where SAP Joule would be accessing information coming from SAC or coming from Datasphere and being able to actually, for example, answer simple questions based on the information that is in Analytics Cloud as well as Datasphere. So, what are you actually gaining when you move to Business Data Cloud? And these are things not just like for you as an SAP Analytics customer or Datasphere customer. These are just general items that Business Data Cloud brings to the table. So, first of all, SAP is going into a direction of what they're calling data products. Now, data products is not something that you can compare to the good old business content from BW. In the good old BW times, you had your extractors, you had your info objects, you had your info providers, and you were basically activating it in your system, and then you hooked up your source data, and that's pretty much it. The data was loaded into your cubes, you had kind of like analytics. But in this case, SAP goes one step further. So the data products are basically pre-built ETL layers, pre-built like raw data. We're now talking about like a medallion architecture, like a bronze, silver, and gold. So a pre-delivered bronze data layer, so to speak. But the important part here is that the data products that our SAP is delivering are actually harmonized across different kind of LOBs. And harmonized in this case basically means, as I mentioned in the beginning, that you only have, let's say, one definition of what your employee is. So let's take the example from the previous slide where we have finance data from S4 and we have HR data from SuccessFactors. Now, previously, you had basically your employee data and SuccessFactors, and you had the finance data where, you have like, costs related to employees like salaries and wages. You have expenses, right? But you had two definitions where at the end, it's still kind of like an employee. It's like Ingo had expenses for travel and Ingo is being paid a salary. And this is where these data products come in harmonized across different kind of LOBs. The other part, on top of those data products, you will see what SAP calls intelligent applications. Those are pretty much your complete, ready to go data models. So we're talking actually your views, your fact views, your analytical models inside of Datasphere, even integrated with Databricks. There will be intelligent applications that where the data is coming out of S4, you have your analytical model inside of Datasphere, but perhaps you're running the forecast in Databricks and the data being shared between Datasphere and Databricks, and then surfaced it all back up inside of SAP Analytics Cloud. The other part is, with Databricks being in the picture, you now actually have a component as part of your overall architecture dedicated for AI and ML workflows. Previously, you had your Datasphere environment, you had the HANA Cloud system underneath, you were able to configure Datasphere and HANA, and then you could use the HANA system with like the HANA ML and HANA PAL libraries. But it wasn't always as easy as customers were wishing for. And with Databricks now coming into the picture, this is where now Databricks can leverage all the information. And important, I'm sure you've heard the term, it's a zero copy basically scenario where the data is not moved from one system to another, but simply the data is being shared. So Datasphere might have the raw data, but Databricks can access it, run the ML scenario, and then share the result with Datasphere. But it's not that you're moving the data from Datasphere into Databricks and kind of like you're paying twice for the storage. This is a slightly different view, which is more kind of like on the level of like the capabilities, what these products are actually bringing to the table. So you can see basically at the bottom, we have the different kind of systems. So kind of like S4, HR, BW, ECC, and, some of them might be actually managed by SAP. Some of them might be managed by yourself. On top, obviously, we have non-SAP systems as well. This could be relational data sources. This could be like simply storage in a cloud provider. The notion that you will hear often now as part of Business Data Cloud is the object store. So, and you can enable it as part of either the Business Data Cloud, or you can, even if you're a Datasphere customer, you can actually enable the object store as part of your Datasphere tenant as well. You can size it accordingly, which then, sorry about that. So it sounded like audio broke off. So I'm not 100% sure where it went off, but so let me just like make sure I recap a few of the key items and then we will go on. So as I mentioned, one of the key items that SAP has added into Business Data Cloud is the object store, which you can see on the slide here. And the object store is basically your option for large volumes and for a much reduced price compared to if you take the standard storage or memory storage, even for example, from SAP Datasphere. So if you have to deal with large volumes of data, which goes into the tens of terabytes, then this might be an option. And even as a Datasphere customer, you can actually enable it even without Business Data Cloud. You can basically, enable it today if you wish, and make use of that cheaper storage level. So I just need to bring back one slide here. Awesome. I want to talk about this, and then we're going to start talking about what actually Business Data Cloud means for you as an SAC or Datasphere customer. So SAP has made this announcement about that Datasphere and Analytics Cloud are now available with Business Data Cloud. And then there was the announcement, and it basically talks about that customers cannot purchase the subscriptions anymore, and that by end of the year 2025, these services will basically be taking off the price list. And as usual with these kind of announcement, there was a lot of kind of suddenly, people are kind of like communicating things, and everybody was communicating different kind of topics. So I want to just kind of like, before we move on, highlight a few items. So first of all, this does not mean that SAP Datasphere and SAP Analytics Cloud are basically not available anymore. Or what it means is that if, for example, you are an existing customer, your existing contract keeps going until obviously, it's ready for renewal. By the time you up for renewal, Datasphere and SAC, most likely, because you can see we're talking end of 2025, are not listed on the price list as individual products anymore, but instead they are basically a service inside of Business Data Cloud. So you would actually be purchasing Business Data Cloud capacity units. If you're a net new customer, you would basically purchase the capacity units right from the beginning. The other part I want to highlight is the last line that you see here on the slide, where it says existing SAP Datasphere and Analytics Cloud tenants will be preserved. So this is very important, because I've seen specifically lately, the last couple of days, messages that customers need to migrate, and customers should start with Greenfield, and you have to migrate all your content and so on. That is absolutely not true. So if you're an existing customer and you have Analytics Cloud or you have Datasphere and you're moving to Business Data Cloud, your content is not lost. Actually, SAP has made that very clear from the beginning, that there's no technical migration for you as a customer required for your content. All what SAP needs to do is what they're calling a little rewiring, so to speak, which is a tenant configuration that SAP will do. And pretty much like, 24 hours later, so to speak, your tenant will be then part of a Business Data Cloud landscape. So it's not like that you have to rebuild all your stories, you have to rebuild all your models, you have to rebuild all your connections. Absolutely not. So let's talk about basically your current landscape. So either you're a customer that you own SAP Analytics Cloud, or you're a customer that owns Datasphere. Potentially you're owning already both. If you're looking at SAP Analytics Cloud, so I'm sure you have been using Analytics Cloud for your operational dashboards, financial planning, potentially predictive, self-service kind of like ideas, depending on how far basically you got on your analytics journey. On the Datasphere side, I'm sure some of you have looked at actually combining Datasphere with BW, potentially moving some of the BW workflows into Datasphere, using Datasphere as your overall foundation, bringing together multiple data sources and having that kind of like true data foundation that actually brings you the semantics from your SAP systems. In the middle, you see some of the values that I would hope you actually got out of like using Datasphere and Analytics Cloud, specifically combined, where you can basically combine different data silos in a true data foundation. And yes, it is a future-proofed overall architecture. Even though it might now feel that SAP brings in, Business Data Cloud, and it is a new kind of like product and new product terms, but none of what you actually did with Datasphere or Analytics Cloud is lost. But why now looking actually at Business Data Cloud, and how can that look like? So let's start basically with what you have. So as we just mentioned, you have SAC, you have Datasphere. So you already have basically an established data integration. So you created your data pipelines, could mean replication flows, data flows inside of Datasphere, could mean data import jobs inside of SAC. You already created a data governance. Now, this could mean data access controls inside of SAC, data access controls inside of Datasphere. And I'm pretty sure you also have done your modeling, you have done kind of like your different scenarios in terms of the models and kind of like terminology that you want to use. And most important, obviously, you upskilled your team in these two products. So now Business Data Cloud comes along. Again, the big important message here is you're not replacing any of your existing investment. You're basically basing any next steps on what you have, and you can extend what you have into Business Data Cloud and leverage what Business Data Cloud is offering. You're not throwing anything away. So one of the items that you can start looking into is basically leveraging the data products that I mentioned. You might have scenario inside of Datasphere as well as Analytics Cloud where you aren't using actually business content from SAP. So as a step one, what I would recommend really is there an option to leverage data products provided by SAP in terms of like pre-built like master data scenarios, pre-built analytical models, pre-built dashboards? Would you be able to leverage those? Now, sometimes there might be a need to do small customization, all possible, but you could basically start looking into leveraging some of the data products and business data cloud, the intelligent apps, instead of actually relying on everything built from scratch. The other scenario is the data catalog. Business Data Cloud comes with the Business Data Cloud catalog as well. There's the Unity catalog on the Databricks side. So that allows you now to bring together SAC assets as well as Datasphere asset into one central catalog, which basically gives your users the start point for, finding the stories, finding the dashboards, actually even a data discovery workflow where it's about, finding the right data. And then as the next step, again, we're building on what we have. We're bringing in multiple important topics such as, Databricks. We start working on basically, enhancing kind of like our AI and ML workflows by, instead of moving data from, let's say, for example, BW to Datasphere, from Datasphere into Databricks, we're actually sharing the information. We're not moving data around anymore. We use the object store, we keep the raw data there, and we just basically access it there instead of moving it around. One of the items for customers that use the financial planning part of SAC is the seamless planning portion. As part of the seamless planning part, you actually, you model the scenario in SAC, but then you materialize the model inside of Datasphere. And there's a variety of benefits as part of that. And obviously, it's fully supported in your Business Data Cloud scenario. So the key message here is really, and we're going to walk through a few scenarios. This going from SAC and going from SAP Datasphere into Business Data Cloud is not basically a replacement of any of your existing investment. You're not throwing anything away. You're actually building on top of it. You use what you have. You use basically your strong foundation, and then you're moving slowly and start leveraging the additional benefits that Business Data Cloud are actually offering you. So how can this very concrete look like, and what are like concrete benefits, and how would it look like from an architectural perspective? So let's start with the use case number one. We have a customer basically who's using SAP Analytics Cloud. So you can see there's no Datasphere, there's no Business Data Cloud in the picture. All what the customer is basically using is Analytics Cloud today. So all our reporting and dashboarding is done via Analytics Cloud. We have some of the models in Analytics Cloud where we import the data, and some of the models where we're using a live connection. So depending on the data source as well as depending on the main purpose. So for example, if we do planning, we import the data into Analytics Cloud. If we perhaps just want to use data out of BW for a dashboard, we could use a live connection. In terms of data security, because we have a mix of live as well as import models inside of Analytics Cloud, we're going to have to basically deal with that by using for live connections the security out of the source systems. And for import models, we would have to set up the data security inside of SAC. In terms of data foundation, and again, that's just kind of like my perspective here, we don't really have a true data foundation. We're accessing data live or we import it into SAC, but we're not kind of like, joining different data from different LBs together. We're not harmonizing it. We're not kind of like creating that, so to speak, single version of the truth. There's no true data foundation in this picture. So how could this picture now change when we're adding Business Data Cloud, and what aspects are actually changing? So first of all, with Business Data Cloud, we're adding Datasphere into the picture. Databricks is an opportunity here as well. It's not a must-have, but definitely it is a component as part of Business Data Cloud that we can basically use based on our capacity units. With Business Data Cloud, we also get the foundation services, which basically, again, bring us to the data products by SAP. And I would highly recommend that, if you're going in this direction, again, that you start looking into scenarios where you can use the data products, where instead of like starting everything from scratch, you simply reuse the data product from SAP. But now basically all our reporting can be based on actually live connections to SAP Datasphere. So instead of having a connection against BW, S4, other data sources, we can basically consolidate all that into Datasphere, and Datasphere becoming basically our data foundation in this picture. Yes, there will be certain models in SAC that still require the data to be in Analytics Cloud, for example, for planning purposes. But also there, we can actually feed the data from Datasphere into SAC. So in that way, Datasphere really becoming basically our solid data foundation for all our workflows. In terms of data security, there's now one big difference here. Because we're treating Datasphere as our data foundation, that now means that we would basically do all the data level security inside of Datasphere. Yes, one exception, if we have the planning model, we would still do the data security inside of SAC for the planning. With the notion of Databricks, we now also have the ability to run ML scenarios, and for example, run predictive forecasting, where Databricks is accessing the information either directly from an object store, for example, a data product from SAP, or from Datasphere, where basically the data is being shared between those two components without having to move like physically the data from Datasphere into Databricks. So again, it looks kind of like perhaps lots major differences between kind of like the before, where we only have SAC, and the after, where we're bringing in Datasphere as well as Databricks as part of a business data cloud system. But keep in mind that this doesn't have to happen everything at the same time. You can basically start adding Datasphere to the picture, working on your SAP data products, working on your analytical models, perhaps introducing the data catalog for like data discovery workflows, and then over time you adding SAP Databricks. It's not like that everything has to happen at the same time. So now, how does it look like if we're basically a customer that already has Analytics Cloud as well as Datasphere? So in our scenario, Datasphere is already the data foundation. So we're bringing in the data from SAP applications as well as non-SAP data sources. This could mean replication flows, data flows, real-time replication, and we're basically building our analytical models. Now, in the SAC world, either our analytical model becomes the data source, or as we mentioned also before, we have an analytics cloud model where we actually load the data into SAC for planning purposes. But again, here we have a customer that has already invested into SAC and into Datasphere. So now, what is it that Business Data Cloud basically adds to the table in this picture? Sorry about that. So very similar as a sort of say, future state as our customer number one. In this case, we basically have already Datasphere and Analytics Cloud. So we're already using certain kind of scenarios. And our first step would be to look into scenarios where instead of us starting from scratch with replicating tables and kind of like worrying about harmonizing data sets, perhaps between like, S4 and success factors, we would start looking at leveraging the data products from SAP. Where possible, we would basically, replace the actual workflows from loading data into Datasphere with the data products offered by SAP and use them as much as possible. Yes, customizations are possible as well, and I'm sure kind of like those will kind of like happen at most customers where you only use certain elements out of the overall end-to-end workflow that SAP provides, and then some pieces of those will be customized. So now with you being a customer that already is using SAP Analytics Cloud as well as Datasphere, I would basically start focusing on a few key elements in this picture. First of all, start using the data catalog inside of Business Data Cloud. The data catalog can become pretty much your entry point of who is allowed to see which assets from SAP Analytics Cloud as well as Datasphere. And on top of that, you also have the lineage and impact from Datasphere and SAP Analytics Cloud together. So you might actually take a look at a story and it shows you where the raw data is sitting in Datasphere that actually makes up the story, as well as that if you make changes to an analytical model, which of the stories are actually impacted. That's a very important part, kind of like from an administrative perspective, that the data catalog can provide to you. On top of that, the data catalog can simply basically become the single entry point for all your users in terms of like which data or which dashboard should I be looking at to actually see certain kind of information. That's the role the data catalog can basically play. And now with you being a customer that already has been using SAC and Datasphere, start looking at Databricks. What are some of the workflows where perhaps you in the past, perhaps you've been using SAP Analytics Cloud Predictive. Perhaps you've been using in non-SAP scenarios for actually getting the data out of Datasphere, running a workflow like your ML scenario, and then bringing the data back into Datasphere. Those kind of scenarios can now completely happen integrated as part of Business Data Cloud, again, without moving the actual data. Perhaps you have brought in all your operational data from S4. Perhaps you brought in all your purchase orders, and you're basically sharing the data with Databricks. no movement of data. You run a forecast in terms of kind of like what to expect from your purchase orders over the next 3, 6, 9 months, and you're sharing it basically back with Datasphere, bringing it then together into an analytical model and basically having your analytics and your dashboard on top. Now let's take another look at customers specifically around planning. So in this case, we have a customer who's basically doesn't have Datasphere today, but we're using Analytics Cloud, yes, for analytics, but also we're using it for planning in this case. So we do have models inside of SAC where we're loading the data from our source applications. Because we're loading the data into SAC, our data security is also set up inside of SAC. And very similar to our first customer, we don't really have a true data foundation. We'll basically have a variety of data sources where we're loading the data into the different like models and different dimensions inside of SAC. So how can this now basically look like in a Business Data Cloud scenario, and what would change for this customer? So first of all, we're bringing in Datasphere into the picture with the seamless planning notion that SAP has released. You're able to basically create your planning model inside of SAC, but you're deploying it into Datasphere. So now that means the Datasphere has access to your planning model and to your planning data. So this now allows you to, for example, combine very easily your actual and your plan data into one simple model inside of Datasphere. So that's a major step as part of the seamless planning scenario. Because all the items are basically available inside of Datasphere now, you can also basically think about the data security and start basically using the data access controls inside of Datasphere to make sure people only see what they allow to see. And you can start slowly moving from, your data access controls inside of SAC to your data access controls inside of the planning model. And again, the other part that you can leverage as part of this picture is obviously the Databricks portion. So you could run certain scenarios now as part of the Databricks. For example, like a simple forecast, simple kind of like ML scenarios, where you're providing then the information back into Datasphere, and that allows you then to combine, for example, the learning that you had from your ML workflow with your planning data. So you heard me talking about the Databricks scenario a few times, so I thought I also give you 2, 3 concrete examples before we kind of like open it up for question and answers. What does this actually mean? What does Databricks bring to the table as part of your Business Data Cloud scenario? So first of all, a very important part is that Databricks is basically bringing to the table this notion of a zero copy. So what this concrete means is, imagine you have a data product by SAP where the data, for example, from S4 Finance is now sitting in your object store. And if in case you want to run a forecast, the data is not actually physically moved out of the object store into Databricks or into Datasphere and then from Datasphere to Databricks. The data is simply basically shared as Delta share, and Databricks has then access to the information without having physically to move the data, which obviously means also you're not basically paying multiple times for the storage of the data. The other part basically that data brings to the table is simply kind of like their AI and ML solutions. So you can basically use, for example, Mosaic AI. You have basically, tools available from Databricks, such as like, the SQL data warehouse, you have notebooks from Databricks, there's the Mosaic AI that you can leverage and actually analyze the data, for example, on plain SQL, but also using AI and ML workflows, simple as basically forecasting scenarios, running a customer segmentation, those kind of items, and then again sharing back the information to, for example, Datasphere. So to give you two concrete examples, so let's assume we basically have a customer where we want to actually know what kind of credit risk we have with our own customers. So in this case, we basically have some of the information coming out of S4. So we have accounts payable, accounts receivable. We know basically kind of like what payments are outstanding. We know the history of our customers in terms of kind of like, have they paid on time or not? And kind of like what's outstanding. That information is all there in our S4HANA system. We even have historical data in BW. This could also mean historical data inside of Datasphere. But now we're bringing in basically external data, where basically, this could mean data that you purchased from an external company. This could mean you, for example, bring in, social kind of like analyst data. And you putting basically all these elements together and you running actually a credit risk assessment inside of Databricks, where Databricks helps you to actually predict. For example, you have a customer, I'm just going to put my name out here. You have a customer, Ingo. Like, how likely is Ingo going to pay basically his invoices over the next kind of like 6 months, to keep it simple? The other scenario I just want to share is very, very similar. We after basically a typical 360-degree picture of our customers. We're basically a huge retail outlet. So some of the data we have is our own simply point of sales data. We have S4HANA data. We have historical data. This could mean BW. This could mean Data Warehouse Cloud. We have basically our own products. We have all the transactions. We have our stocks, our inventory. But now we also want to see, for example, how are our customers potentially talking about our products? So we want to bring in the social media items, things like, Facebook, click streams, Twitter, all those kind of things. We also want to bring in demographic information about our customers in terms of like, where they located geographically, but also kind of like, any additional information we can get from them, which then brings us all together, creating that 360-degree view of the customer that we're talking about. And then we can basically start looking into, profitability scenarios. We can create basically very dedicated marketing activities for them based on, for example, their geographic information. Perhaps we're talking about seasonal kind of like activities based on actual like, weather information, right? So that we're not, as an example, ending up selling t-shirts basically on Christmas Day. So we started looking at basically what Business Data Cloud can bring to the table in general, pretty much for any kind of customer. We went through scenarios in terms of what does Business Data Cloud actually mean for a customer that only has SAP Analytics Cloud. What if you have Analytics Cloud as well as Datasphere? What if basically you want to look at the seamless planning integration? But most important, as I mentioned, moving from SAC and Datasphere to Business Data Cloud does not mean that you're throwing away any of your existing assets. It's not a scenario where you basically, so to speak, reinventing the wheels, but instead you actually leverage what you have. you're building on top of what you created as a trusted data foundation. And then you can slowly start looking into what Business Data Cloud can bring to the table, such topics such as the data catalog, being able to consolidate your data security into what Datasphere has to offer, being able to leverage Databricks for AI and ML. So instead of kind of like thinking that Business Data Cloud is kind of like a brand new product and you have to start over, take a look at it and think of it as basically your next step based on what you already created, and all the assets that you have are basically coming with you. You're not kind of like starting over. You basically leverage what you have and you building on top of that. I hope that kind of like gave you a good kind of like overview. So I want to open it up for question and answers. So in case you do have any kind of questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, and then we'll basically go through it. Again, if there's any kind of questions, feel free to basically put them into the chat or put them into the questions. I want to say simply thank you to everyone who joined us this morning. I hope it was useful and kind of like, you able to take something out of the content for your own move to Business Data Cloud. We will share the material and the recording after this. And just again, want to say thank you for joining us today.